Welcome back. This is the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. During this time, we've come a long way, but there's still a lot to be done. Becky Curran Kekula is a motivational speaker and advocate for inclusion everywhere. Hi, Becky.
Hi, it's so great to see you.
It's good to see you too. How are you doing?
I'm great, just hanging in there.
Yep, I think that's true for a lot of us. So let's talk a little bit, because I want to be specific about what employers can do to consider hiring someone with a disability. So could you give us 3 things that they could think about doing in order to make that happen?
Absolutely. I think one of the biggest pieces is get out of your own way and just do it. People worry often about etiquette, so become familiar with terminology, but don't get so stuck on it. Just refer to a person as their name, their given name, who they are. A big piece of being welcoming in your workplace is offering to make an accommodation, whether it's the application process, the interview process, once someone's onboarded, and then provide mentorship opportunities. We're often celebrating new hires with disabilities. The numbers continue to grow, and we don't celebrate enough putting people in high level positions at companies. And they have that capability as well if they get the support, mentorship, and constructive feedback that they need to learn and grow. And then one of the biggest recruitment pieces is making sure when you're recruiting from colleges that colleges, career centers and disability services centers are communicating, because in most cases, if they don't communicate, then people with disabilities miss out on the opportunities that come to the university when it comes to jobs.
One of the things you mentioned is accommodations. And I know the way that the law reads, it says something about reasonable job accommodations for people with disabilities. What's an example of something, perhaps in the interview process, might be a reasonable accommodation that an employer could use in order to make it more likely that someone with a disability would be hired?
I think it's really taking a look at your office space and the space where you're planning to perform the interview, make it accessible from the beginning. And then once someone requests an accommodation, you may not really have to do much. Most accommodations cost less than $500, and people are always fearful that it's just going to add expenses throughout the hiring process. But it really is something that can end up helping everyone in the end. So be mindful. For me, for an example, if I were to go to a high floor, we would want to make sure that the elevator button was something that I could reach to be able to get to that high floor. Or maybe it would be helpful for me to have a step stool so my legs aren't hanging when I'm sitting during the interview. And then that could be helpful once the onboarding process helps as well. I think it's just really important to ask people what you can do to help them be successful in whatever part of the process it may be, but don't feel like it's going to be a burden and don't act like it's a burden. It's really just something that can make them feel successful. And the reason why it's a reasonable accommodation is because it's something that can make someone feel comfortable, but it's not going above and beyond at that point.
Well, it seems also that it's something simple that you can do to accommodate someone who has a disability who also could contribute to your organization in such a meaningful way, because once you can get beyond some of those things and accommodate some of those potential needs, then you're able to take full advantage of everything that they have to offer. And I think you mentioned being able to reach an elevator button. As a little person, your background is that you applied something like 1,000 times and did 100 interviews before you had your first job, and it took months for you to go through that process. Did you have the sense all through that process that people weren't willing to make accommodations?
I really just didn't see the language anywhere. And then I didn't feel empowered to mention on my resume or the confirmation email that they sent to me that I was a little person, because I just kept thinking in my head of additional barriers that could come up. So I tried really hard to hide the fact that I was a little person and just try to get there. But that ended up not being in my favor, and it prevented me from having an open interaction before we had the in-person interview where there ended up being a shock factor.
So there were three things that you mentioned an employer can do. What are three things that someone with a disability can do in order to nail an interview?
I think what's really important is to make sure that you're passionate about the job that you're applying to. Also, make sure that you feel empowered to do the job that you're applying to, and then just go and give it your all and hope that any elephant that may be in the room in the beginning of the process will go away once you prove that you are capable.
You and I have talked about something that neuroscientists have identified, and that is the social pain of exclusion. And I think that's why it's so important for us to understand, all of us, that when it comes to including people, it's not a question of tolerating people or putting up with people, but it's more that sense of welcoming someone, making them feel that they belong, and engaging people. Because you mentioned mentorship. That's a wonderful way for people with differences to engage with one another.
Absolutely, and constructive feedback is so important. Don't think that you can't give someone constructive feedback just because they have a disability. It will end up helping them learn and grow in the future. And ask questions, don't make assumptions. I think you'll be surprised at how few accommodations people ask for to be successful on the job. And we like to call them productivity tools that help someone become successful on the job.
I like that, productivity tools. It was so great talking to you, Becky. As always, we appreciate your time, and I think it's so important that we set the vision for the next 30 years moving beyond this point and the work we've done to this point. So thank you again.
Well, thank you for having me. And just remember to include and continue to educate yourself on the disability community and all that we can contribute to society.
Love it. Thanks again, Becky.
Thank you.
Absolutely. We saw some video of Becky doing some motivational speaking. You can learn more about her and her mission by going to beckymotivates.com.